All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to let Jake give me maybe a comment. Just let me know if I'm coming through loud and clear. All right. Well, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining the second of our recurring live stream that we're going to be hosting on the first Thursday of every month. The intention of this is to help educate technology companies, accountants, our clients, our partners about our experiences as a software and consulting provider specializing in order to cash, subscription billing, revenue recognition, and automation for over the last 20 years. So today we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson and discuss how the SaaS subscription economy started, how it's evolved, how it's impacted the modern day startup, and really the kind of the current day challenges for automating subscription management, billing, and revenue, and then how to avoid these challenges. So I'll say I'm on day 5 of COVID. So I'm going to try to mute myself and not cough too much in your guys' ears. But if I have to grab a drink of water, please just bear with me. So feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat as we go. And the team and myself will try to answer throughout the session or at the end. All right. So I'll go to the next slide here. And let's actually make this full screen. So I'll do a short introduction. My name is John Leipzig. I'm the VP of Growth. I live in Portland, Oregon with my wife and 3 kids. I started my career in finance and accounting. I worked doing Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, systems evaluations, systems and integration work, and ultimately implemented a handful of ERPs and different subscription billing solutions. I've since moved on to consulting and sales, primarily geared towards software and services companies running or wanting to run their business on NetSuite and automate their complex subscription and revenue business models. So the agenda for today is a little bit jam-packed. I'll try to fit it in here in the next 30 minutes. But as you can see here, and as I mentioned, I wanted to start with a little bit of a timeline of the history of SaaS, when it was created, how it's changed over the years, the technologies that have really impacted it, and how it's allowed it to scale, and how really the challenges of the modern day startup are really from only the last 5 or 10 years, even though the SaaS industry has been around for 20 to 25. I also wanted to cover the rise of usage-based pricing and why that has really impacted the industry. And I'll walk through the pitfalls of what most companies buy or implement to manage their subscription billing and their revenue and doing multiple systems. And then I'll talk about the ways to avoid these pitfalls, which, as the agenda of the topic, is using an ERP as your subscription billing and revenue solution. So we'll jump to the next slide here. As we know, technology has rapidly improved over the last 50 to 100 years. But the global technology industry really only started to form in the last, say, 23 years, mostly due in part to the internet, communication, infrastructure. And so with that, the technology industry, and in particularly the SaaS sector, is the fastest growing industry in the world. And I think, as with any relatively new business sector that changes so frequently, it's not a surprise that the industry has a lot of problems with automating and managing their order to cash, or what some people call quote to revenue. So that's why we felt it was really important to kind of understand the history here of SaaS and just subscriptions in general, so we can understand why these problems have arisen so fast without really many viable solutions, and discuss how, how some companies are trying to solve that problem. So here on the left, as the story goes, the idea for Salesforce.com, CRM, which probably everybody knows, and NetSuite and ERP were born in the same conversation by a few co-founders. A lot of people debate about which came first, but I think generally speaking, Salesforce takes the crown. But both were the first multi-tenant cloud company. And, they literally changed the world. And because of that, my kids will never know what it's like to buy physical CDs and install new software, or working at companies that have big server rooms for storing or hosting applications or data locally. That's a thing of the past. But that didn't happen overnight once those companies were founded. So as you probably know, SaaS offers many advantages, like lower costs, ease of setup, accessibility. It's easily upgraded. But at the beginning, it really took about 10 years after Salesforce and NetSuite were founded for companies to really understand what SaaS was, how to adopt it, how to deploy it. And, it came with a lot of challenges even then at the time. So many people around the world, I mean, still weren't even using the internet, back around 2000, even 2010. It could be slow and clunky. There were a lot of security threats emerging. But during that time, as you can see here in the timeline, we had a huge surge in technologies like broadband and mobile phones and internet security solutions, browsers, APIs, open source concepts that really helped to alleviate some of the early day challenges for adoption. And one of the biggest challenges for a startup was infrastructure and databases to store their applications, for them to do product development, store their customer data that could be accessible to all the users. And in the early days, entrepreneurs were spending about 70% of their engineering time on that, building data centers and designing and maintaining basic infrastructure software, and only about 30% of their employee energy was developing new products. However, as you can see here in around 2006, the creation of AWS kind of flipped that ratio on its head. Initially, customers only needed an email and a credit card to sign up with AWS, and they could get access to data storage, computing power, database services, which made it so much easier for companies to start businesses online with a lot less capital. Excuse me. So now AWS, as you guys probably know, is everywhere. It allows startups like Airbnb or Lyft to skyrocket in growth. It's enabled our streaming. It helped actually the digital drug design for the Moderna vaccine. Football teams use it for computing power to analyze their game data. City and state governments use it to archive their data. So it's everywhere, and it's eliminated a huge barrier to entry for someone with a SaaS startup idea. And it basically created $1 trillion industry called cloud computing. But surprisingly, it took quite a few years between 2006 and 2010 for any competitors to respond. So even today, AWS still controls a pretty large majority of the market. But as you can see down here, during that time, we also got the iPhone, social media, streaming applications started emerging around this time, the beginnings of AI, VR, 4G, blockchain, the concept of the Internet of Things. And then we also had Azure and competitors to AWS, Google, IBM, and others get founded around that time. So still here around 2010, even though the SaaS market was around 9 billion, only about 25% of the world was using the internet still. So again, this isn't that long ago. This is 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago. And then coincidentally, our company, ZoneCo, was founded in 2013. But really, this gets us to kind of like the last 10 or 12 years in this timeline. And in that time, we've experienced a lot of new technologies that have changed the industry. So many subcategories of SaaS and subscription billing. We saw the dawn of like big data, modern day data warehousing, Zoom and other communication platforms, an unbelievable amount of security threats and software solutions out there, online gaming, fintech exploding, and then a lot of variations of SaaS like platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and of course, like non-SaaS related subscriptions like, the work from home and rental economy really started to take over, especially during the pandemic. And then also in the last few years, companies have really had to figure out how to comply with, what we call in the US ASC 606 or internationally IFRS 15, which are the revenue recognition standards that came out for how to recognize revenue for SaaS software usage and services. And it's really complicated, not just from the billing side of the house, but for the revenue recognition side of the house for companies that are now starting up today. Again, it seems like every industry, not just software, is moving towards a subscription model. More and more people are working from home. They need ways to communicate. They need productivity tools, protecting their data. Small businesses need a lot more B2B software for ordering and delivering or marketing and media. There's even, a software called Truebill that helps you track all of your subscriptions and help you reduce your costs because you might have a bunch of subscriptions that you forget about. Or like myself and my wife, we've got subscription grocery deliveries, subscription dinners, subscription workout platforms. It's pretty much everywhere. So the whole point of this is to say that so much of this growth has really just happened in the last 5 to 8 years. And as you can see down here, some estimates now put that there's about 100,000 startups created every day. And so it's really just the beginning for SaaS and subscription services. And again, just looking at between 2010 to 2022, we now have internet usage at about 70%. So that's a lot, but we still have 30% of the way to go. But it's just changed so much in the last decade. All right. So why am I going through all this old information that I may be very common knowledge to a lot of you? It's just to say that this has changed what a company needs when they start a business today. Now, when you start a business overnight, you could be selling globally. You could be communicating globally, marketing, using social media globally. You can spin up new applications, build new software much faster, build on add-ons. Because of software, you can now scale so much faster. But again, there's 100,000 startups happening every day. A lot of them are failing very quickly, or they're catching a wave, they're getting investments, they're capturing some niche in the market, and they are growing very rapidly. And it's very hard for them to scale and then keep up with the competition. And we see a lot of companies that are getting acquired and kind of creating these unified platforms in retail or e-commerce or B2B softwares, where you have all these software startups in the same space, and some company comes in and decides to acquire a bunch of them and then offer those to the same customer base. So the businesses are just changing so fast, and what people thought they needed in the early days for billing and revenue is very different because of that. Because they're now selling globally, they have needs for tax and localization and different pricing models, different currencies. Their pricing models change all the time. Their product offering changes quite frequently. And honestly, a lot of companies can't hire fast enough to do all these things manually in the office under the CFO. So the other thing here is that the one thing, as I said, most companies now have in common, a lot of the companies that I've worked with over the years, is that the only constant among all of them is that their pricing model and product offering will change, usually within the next 12 months. Every company I've worked with or have worked for has a new pricing model or a new product every 12 months. And I think a lot of the software companies that we work with are the same. And as I mentioned, a lot of companies are acquiring each other. So now they're trying to integrate what those other companies offered. And maybe they had a different pricing model, and they're trying to now offer those in the same contracts. And so you need a really flexible system to be able to do the automation of contract management, billing, payments, revenue recognition, and ultimately the financial reporting across all those product lines or subsidiaries. As I mentioned early on, there's been a huge shift as of recently, the last 5 or so years. And I think we're right in the middle of it, where SaaS and service companies have been ditching traditional subscription pricing. Excuse me. Really kind of in favor of usage-based models that better align with modern day buying behavior and value delivered by their products. So usage-based pricing, or sometimes people call it UBB, is consumption-based pricing, and it connects how a customer pays with the given, like what they're consuming over a period of time. So some reports say that across 600 participants, that 45% of SaaS companies already had a usage-based pricing model in 2021. And of that figure, 61% of them expect to either launch or test a usage-based pricing in the near future. And what they meant by in the near future was 6 to 24 months. So basically what that's saying is if this trend continues, usage-based pricing will become the norm, as opposed to the exception to like a flat recurring model for subscriptions or SaaS. So for us as a company that works with a lot of companies to try to automate their usage-based pricing, I think a lot of people think of usage-based pricing as simply, hey, I consumed 100 units and it's $1 per unit. I need to bill $100. But once sales teams get a hold of usage-based pricing, they start to come up with a lot of creative ideas for how they want to sell usage-based pricing, if it can help them win a deal. And so oftentimes what we see with even just a simple pay-as-you-go model, like we see here on the left, is that there might be attributes of the usage that get billed and some attributes of the usage that don't, or maybe they have different rates. Like CPM, that's cost per 1,000 impressions. So you need a billing system that can divide by 1,000 and then multiply by 10 cents. Or again, maybe you have that model divided by 1,000, you have some calculation, but you also have tiered pricing like we see here. And so we divide by 1,000, and then we have to say, the first 500 are free, 501 to 1,000 or $8 or whatever the pricing might be. And you need a system that can calculate that. And again, both of these situations might be billed in arrears. But then what we've seen as a very popular model is what we call prepaid credits or buckets of usage. So sometimes companies will say, hey, why don't we try to get the cash up front? We'll estimate what you might use, and then we'll deplete that bucket of usage over time. And from a cash flow perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll offer the customer a discount if they kind of prepay for their usage. But this can create a lot of complications, as I mentioned earlier, around revenue recognition, where they might give you $50,000 today for, in this case, the unit of measure is 25,000 verifications, but you can't recognize that. You have to recognize that in your financial statements as the customer consumes it. So if they use $1,525 of this in the first month, that's what you have to be able to recognize. And so this adds a lot of complications for the accounting team to be able to, the billing side of this one's easy. You just bill them $50,000 when the contract's signed, but you have to recognize the revenue. And then at some point they might consume that bucket. And in this instance, again, they might have a flat fee for overage once they consume these 25,000 verifications, or maybe they have tiers after they consume this. These are all variations that we see pretty frequently across our customer base using NetSuite. And then kind of moving to these last two here, oftentimes there's minimum commitments, and those can be billed at the beginning of the period. They can be billed at the end after they look at the usage. And so again, you need to be able to have a multi-billing stream where on the same invoice, you've got billing for their minimum for the current period, plus on that same invoice, overages from the previous period that are being billed in arrears if they went over their minimums or their included units. And then the last one here is, again, we're working with a lot of companies that have ad hoc usage. So instead of looking at what was consumed at the end of a period, let's say a month or a quarter, maybe we're looking at that data as it happens in real time. And so, again, think about like a bookings website. And, if somebody books something during the regular, the high season, or the holiday, I need to bill that immediately to them. And maybe it's at different rates depending on the time that that's booked. Okay. So again, there's a lot of variations of that with the attributes or tiered pricing, things like that, but it's no longer billing at a certain cadence. It can be as a customer consumes the data. All right, so we can jump to the next slide here. With all this information in mind, that we've covered, so the way the SaaS industry's kind of grown and the complications that have come from that, the rise of usage-based pricing, I wanted to walk through what it's usually typically like for a company, and it's what I experienced at a startup, as they grow from kind of the first ideas of building the product to then scaling. So most companies, they start building their products. They have engineering platforms, development platforms, infrastructure platforms like AWS that they start with. And then when they go to market, the first investment they make is usually in some sort of CRM tool like Salesforce.com. And oftentimes a financial application or accounting software like QuickBooks or Xero or something similar. And in these early years, this is usually when a company finds out if they're going to make it or not, right? And if you're lucky enough to, again, kind of find that niche or capture market share or raise money, most of these companies will then start adding on point solutions to help automate things at their company, like expense management, productivity with Slack, communication with Zoom, HR, development, and eventually the office of the CFO, the accounting and finance team, will eventually get some budget after screaming and yelling, but they're usually the last to get it, that they just can't manually bill and recognize for forever. And they need to evaluate an order to cash solution or a subscription billing solution. And again, they don't think they need an ERP. They might just think we need to automate contracts and billing. And we need to manage upsells and downsells and conversions, renewals. We need to collect payments. And so essentially they add on an accounting subledger. on a different application that can do the billing and the revenue. And as the company grows, they might need global tax and localization. So they might add on tools like Avalara that can kind of connect to these, as well as doing the kind of the quoting and the billing side. And then, as we discussed, there's very strict rules around how companies are required to recognize revenue based on their performance obligations. And so, they might add a revenue recognition tool so they can get that out of Excel. And sometimes these are built into the billing solutions. Sometimes they're third-party applications that are connected to those billing solutions that you need to talk to. And then you have now, again, a subledger just for deferred revenue and your revenue. And at the end of the day, you have to get all that information, the customer data, the invoicing, the deferred revenue, to do your reconciliations in your financial accounting system, and so that you can do financial reporting, right? And so this is where a lot of this starts to break down, because now you've got multiple systems creating GL posting information, and it can oftentimes become a reconciliation nightmare. You've got mismatched data, you might have integration errors, you're manually uploading or downloading data. And then also you have duplicated records in the system, duplicated invoices in two systems, duplicated RevRec entries in two systems that you have to make sure are in sync and match. And then lastly here, as we've seen, a lot of companies are moving towards a usage-based pricing model. And so another application that might be added in is a data mediation platform. So this is where your engineering systems, your development platforms are taking the data your customers are consuming, sending it to that data mediation layer to do calculations like that divide by 1,000 or do tiered pricing, and communicate with the billing system about what that customer used and how they used it to then create the invoice in that system. So, taking a step back from all this, personally, when I was in accounting and working at a software company that had SaaS subscriptions, we had usage-based billing. I didn't choose to add all these applications. I was sort of forced to, because the system I had at the time, my financial system or ERP, could not do it. Excuse me. It couldn't support my needs. And so this was my only option. But that has changed and is continuing to change, which kind of brings me to really the point of this conversation today, this live stream. And all financial systems and ERPs have basically realized this opportunity. And they've been working for many years to try to figure out, how do we take all these subscription point solutions and do the same thing in our financial system or our ERP? And a lot of them are coming up with very viable or even better solutions than a point solution to do it within the ERP. So it eliminates a lot of integrations, like you saw in that previous slide. So here, the ERP can ingest new contracts or changes to contracts. In the same system, you can be doing the usage-based data mediation or calculations connected to the proprietary systems where you're storing your customers' data and their usage. In real time, we can be distributing the invoices or even fulfilling inventory. These are posting directly to your balance sheet for deferred revenue, sending out that information to payment gateways and providers or banks to collect payment. Again, these can be reconciled in real time to your AR inside your balance sheet. You can now be recognizing revenue in the same system, tracking your deferred revenue. And again, in real time, as you post revenue in that RevRec system, it's happening in the same system as your financials. And so there's no reconciliation that needs to be done. This is happening in real time. So most ERPs like NetSuite, Intact, and others, they've been around for 20 years. They already have multi-language, multi-subsidiary, multi-currency to track unrealized, realized revaluations, gains and losses, global tax. So these systems already have that all in place. What they've been missing is the billing side of it, the subscription and contract management. And they've come a long way. And the point here is that if you are a company that's growing and having challenges with automating, the creation of contracts, subscriptions, usage-based pricing, and billing and payments, maybe consider upgrading from your accounting software, which might be QuickBooks or Xero, as I said before, to an ERP to act as your billing solution, as opposed to looking at a point solution, because that can create more problems down the road as you grow and you become more complex. You have other product offerings, you have more requirements globally. Those point solutions may not be able to fill all the needs that you have. It's really only a stopgap at that point. So I know we're running a little bit short on time. We've got about 5 minutes. But again, just to kind of recap here, if you have this all in one system as opposed to point solutions, you can save a lot on admin and IT costs because you have less systems to learn, less systems to manage, less systems to integrate. You have a more unified source of truth. You truly have the teams living in, sales and quoting, living in their CRM, and you have finance and accounting all living in one system as opposed to having to log into multiple. So hold on, let me just check. Make sure there's some questions here or no questions. All right, I think we're good. I'll keep going. All right, so to kind of recap here, the needs of the modern day SaaS startup have changed. Again, this has only happened in the last 5 or 10 years. That's why it's taken so long for there to be solutions out there. Certainly, there are always needs for point solutions, but try to think about when it's necessary to use a point solution and think about your growth path and the problems you'll have. We've worked with a lot of companies to migrate their data into their ERP to do all their subscription billing and revenue. And a lot of times those companies have already gone through that slide I showed with that mess of all the different point solutions, and we're trying to move them off of that. And those projects can take a long time. They can be, 4, 5, 6, 9, 12 months even, because there's a lot of data and history and old pricing models and multiple subsidiaries that we need to migrate because these companies are now, 100+ million in revenue. But if you think early on as a startup that, hey, let's try to do this in a single system that we'll never have to move off of. Let's look at an ERP to do this. And then if we need inventory or we need more procure to pay management and approvals and procure to pay, or we need more complex financial reporting to close the books with multiple subsidiaries, if you're not there yet, it's there and ready for you. You've thought about, you have your billing system in place. You don't need to integrate that and upgrade to an ERP later down the road, which will make it more complex. Oh, sorry, let me go back into full screen here. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to thank everybody for the time today and for listening. If you are a partner out there that does consulting or ERP work or order to cash consulting, you can reach out to our partnership team. You can reach out to Cindy McMillan at Zone & Co. And then if you have any questions about the live stream today or have any comments or suggestions for the next session, you can drop them in the chat section, and I'll hang out here for a few minutes in case there's any questions that come through. All right. Well, I don't think we have any questions. We're over time. So I just want to say thanks again, everyone, for joining. Again, we are doing this the first Thursday of every month. Feel free to email us or put in the comments if you have suggestions about future topics. But again, thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we'll see you next month.